The emergency landing on Varela 9 had been nothing short of catastrophic. As I crawled from the smoking wreckage of my transport ship, the Dust Goal, I was greeted by the planet's signature scent, a nauseating mix of sulfur and something metallic that coated my tongue like old pennies. Not exactly the welcoming committee I'd hoped for, but then again, nothing in my life ever went according to plan. My name is Moreau Cass, cargo pilot and professional nobody. The kind of person whose life story could be summed up with, well, he tried. I'd been hauling industrial supplies to the outer colonies when my ship's ionic coil decided to call it quits mid-jump. Now I was stranded on Varela 9, quite possibly the most godforsaken rock in this sector of space. Varela 9 existed on the fringes of civilized space, a harsh wasteland with just enough breathable atmosphere to support the market, a ramshackle collection of structures cobbled together from salvaged spacecraft parts. The planet's thin, toxic air burned in my lungs as I trudged toward what passed for civilization on this barren world. Radiation levels weren't immediately lethal, but they weren't exactly friendly either. Stay too long, and your cells would start throwing a revolution. The market was the planet's sole gathering place, a chaotic maze of stalls constructed from scrap metal and salvaged ship panels. Smugglers, exiles, and desperate souls conducted business under the dim purple glow of makeshift lights. The air was thick with desperation and suspicion. Nobody came to Varela 9 by choice. You ended up here when all other options had expired. My situation was critical. Without a Class 6 ionic coil, the Dust Goal would remain permanently grounded. My supplies were limited, my credits even more so, and staying on this hellhole of a planet any longer than necessary wasn't just a bad idea. It was potentially fatal. I needed that coil, and I needed it fast before I ran out of resources or found myself in deeper trouble than I already was. I wandered through the market, scanning the stalls for anything resembling spacecraft parts. The vendors watched me with predatory eyes, sensing fresh meat. Most of what they offered was junk, parts too damaged or too outdated to be of any real use. My prospects were looking bleaker by the minute. That's when I noticed a commotion. A small crowd had gathered around one of the stalls, jeering and laughing. Curiosity got the better of me, and I edged closer to see what was happening. At the center of the crowd stood a woman. At least, I assumed she was female. She wasn't human, that much was clear. Her skin was pale with a silvery undertone, marked by an intricate network of scars that shimmered like mercury when she moved. But what really set her apart were her ears, long, elegantly tapered appendages that extended well beyond where human ears would end, with a subtle curve to them. They seemed almost functional, constantly adjusting their position slightly, like satellite dishes homing in on signals. "Look at the freak, trying to haggle," one of the onlookers shouted, prompting a fresh wave of laughter. The vendor, a burly man with cybernetic implants protruding from his neck, sneered at her. "I don't deal with ugly experiments. Bad for business. Scram before you scare away my real customers." The alien woman didn't react to the insults. Her face remained impassive, resigned, as if she'd heard it all before, which I suspected she had. There was something in her posture, a rigid dignity, a determination to endure. She stood straight-backed amid the mockery, neither flinching nor retreating, her strange, iridescent eyes fixed on some middle distance. Every instinct told me to walk away. Getting involved would only complicate my already precarious situation. I had my own problems to worry about, namely, getting off this rock before I ran out of supplies or radiation poisoning set in. And yet, I found myself moving toward her, pushing past the jeering onlookers. Up close, I could see that her scars weren't random injuries, but had a pattern to them, like circuitry etched into her skin. Her eyes, I now realized, contained no pupils, just an expanse of pale blue with flecks of silver. She turned those eyes toward me, wary and defensive. I suppose she was waiting for whatever new cruelty I might add to the chorus. Instead, I looked at her, really looked beyond the scars and the alien features. I saw intelligence in those strange eyes, and a weariness that spoke of long suffering. There was beauty there, not despite her differences but because of them. You're beautiful, I said, the words coming unbidden but sincere. The market fell silent. The alien woman stared at me, her expression shifting from wariness to confusion, then to something I couldn't quite name. Her lips parted slightly as if to speak, but no words came. Then, to my complete astonishment, she slowly sank to her knees in the dusty ground and began to cry. They weren't human tears. They were silvery droplets that caught the light like mercury, sliding down her scarred cheeks and falling to the dirt where they seemed to glow briefly before fading. Her shoulders shook silently. The long ears drooped, curving inward as if trying to shield her from the world. The crowd dispersed uncomfortably, suddenly finding their mockery less amusing. The vendor muttered something about freaks and turned his attention elsewhere. I stood frozen, utterly bewildered by her reaction. I'm sorry, I stammered, dropping to one knee beside her. I didn't mean to upset you. She looked up at me, those silver-flecked eyes capturing my gaze. You did not, she said, her voice soft and musical, with an odd resonance, as if multiple tones were layered beneath her words. It has been a very long time since anyone meant those words. I clear my throat, feeling awkward but strangely compelled to stay. I'm Miro Cass. My ship crashed, and I'm stuck here until I can find a Class 6 ionic coil. She studied me for a moment, then gracefully rose to her feet. I am Elira, she replied, each syllable of her name carrying that same multi-tone quality. She hesitated, then added, I may be able to help you with your coil. Before I could respond, the vendor who had been mocking her earlier called out to me. You don't want to get mixed up with that one, Spacer. She's trouble, some kind of escape lab experiment. Stay clear if you know what's good for you. Elira's expression hardened, but she remained silent. I looked between her and the vendor, then made my decision. About that coil? I said to her, pointedly ignoring the man's warning. A hint of surprise flickered across her face, quickly masked by caution. I might know where to find one, or perhaps even fabricate one, given the right materials and tools. She paused, then added with clear reluctance, but I would require assistance in return. I have a fusion core in my workshop that needs repair. It is complicated and dangerous. Dangerous how? I asked, though I already knew I'd agree. Beggars can't be choosers, and I was most definitely begging at this point. The kind of dangerous that could level half this settlement if handled improperly, she replied matter-of-factly. I laughed to spite myself. So, just a normal Tuesday then. I extended my hand to her, a universal gesture of agreement. You help me with my coil. I help you with your fusion core. Deal. She looked at my hand, then hesitantly reached out. Her fingers were cool to the touch, and I could feel the subtle ridges of her scars against my palm. Deal, she said, withdrawing her hand quickly. Elira's workshop was located on the outskirts of the market, in what appeared to be the remnants of an old shuttle bay. The exterior was unremarkable, deliberately so, I suspected, just another pile of scrap in a landscape littered with debris. Inside, however, was a different story. The space was cramped and chaotic, but with a kind of organized disorder that suggested method in the madness. Tools and components I recognized mingled with alien technology one couldn't begin to identify. Cables snaked across the ceiling like mechanical vines, connecting haphazard arrays of equipment. In one corner, a series of glass containers held what looked disturbingly like preserved biological specimens, including what I could have sworn was an eyeball floating in luminescent fluid. In the center of it all sat the fusion core, a cylindrical device about as tall as I was, with its housing removed to expose a complex tangle of components. Even my untrained eye, it looked like it was in bad shape. Scorch marks marred its surface, and several connections were visibly damaged. Well, I said, surveying the setup with a mixture of fascination and apprehension, this looks interesting. Elira moved around the workshop with practiced efficiency, gathering tools. The core is from a hegemony cruiser. 3rd generation. It overloaded during a power surge, damaging several critical systems. And you just happen to have a military-grade fusion core lying around. I asked, raising an eyebrow. She paused in her movements. I salvage. I repair. I do not ask questions about origins. Neither should you. Fair enough. I transported enough questionable cargo in my time not to throw stones. So what's the plan? I know engines and basic mechanics, but fusion cores aren't exactly my specialty. I need someone to assist with the manual aspects while I work on the more delicate components, she explained. The radiation shielding is compromised in several sections, which limits how long I can safely work on alone. Radiation, I repeated flatly. Wonderful. There are protective suits, she added, gesturing to what looked like outdated hazmat gear hanging on a nearby wall. They are mostly effective. Your confidence is overwhelming, I muttered, but moved to examine the fusion core more closely. Despite the danger, I found myself intrigued by the challenge. And besides, it wasn't like I had better options. Over the next few days, Elira and I fell into an unlikely partnership. She was brilliant. There was no other word for it. Her understanding of technology, both human and alien, was intuitive and profound. My role was primarily to follow her instructions, holding components in place, making adjustments to systems she couldn't reach while working on others, and occasionally offering insights from my own experience with spacecraft systems. At first, our interactions were purely technical, focused entirely on the task at hand. Elira was reserved, efficient, and precise in her instructions. She didn't waste words on unnecessary conversation. But as hours stretched into days, I found myself filling the silence with stories, tales of disastrous cargo runs, narrow escapes from customs officials, the eccentric clients I'd encountered over the years, my peculiar family back on Mars. I talked partly to distract myself from the tedium and danger of our work, and partly because silence had never been my strong suit. Elira rarely responded beyond the occasional nod or subtle shift in expression, but I noticed she never asked me to stop. Sometimes I caught her ears twitching in my direction, their movements somehow conveying more emotion than her carefully controlled face. Gradually, almost imperceptibly, the tension between us began to ease. She remained guarded, but now and then I caught glimpses of something else. A barely perceptible upturn at the corner of her mouth that might have been the beginning of a smile, a slight softening around her eyes when I recounted a particularly absurd mishap. During one break, a small drone emerged from a charging station in the corner and hovered over to Elira. It was an odd little thing, cobbled together from mismatched parts, but moving with surprising grace. "Meet Kip," she said, as the drone circled around her head before settling on her shoulder. I rebuilt him from parts one found in a scrapyard. His primary programming was corrupted, but his personality matrix remained intact. "He has a personality?" I asked, watching as the drone emitted a series of cheerful beeps. "All advanced AI develops idiosyncrasies over time," she replied, reaching up to adjust something on the drone. "Kip is curious and stubborn." As if to demonstrate, the drone lifted off her shoulder and flew directly toward me, hovering inches from my face in clear inspection. I laughed, resisting the urge to swat it away. "Takes after his owner, I see." I thought I saw the ghost of a smile cross her face before she turned away. It was the closest thing to warmth I'd witnessed from her. As we worked, I began to notice patterns in Elira's behavior. She avoided certain frequencies on the diagnostic equipment, flinching almost imperceptibly when they approached specific ranges. Her long ears would flatten against her head, and her movements would become temporarily less fluid, more mechanical, as if she were forcing herself to continue despite discomfort. More tellingly, there were moments when her carefully maintained composure would slip. After particularly long stretches of work, or when we encountered unexpected complications, I'd catch glimpses of bone-deep weariness in her eyes, a profound exhaustion that seemed to go beyond the physical. In those moments, she looked vulnerable, human, despite her alien features. It made me wonder what her story was, how she'd ended up alone on this desolate planet, why she carried herself like someone perpetually braced for an attack, and what had caused those intricate scars that marked her skin. On the fifth day, we made a breakthrough with the fusion core. After replacing a critical regulator and recalibrating the containment field, the device hummed to life, its central chamber filling with a soft blue glow that cast eerie shadows throughout the workshop. "It works!" I exclaimed, unable to contain my excitement. "You did it! We did it!" Elira corrected, her voice holding a note I hadn't heard before, something almost like satisfaction, but needs further stabilization. The containment field is still fluctuating beyond acceptable parameters. "We should celebrate this one anyway," I insisted. "I've got a bottle of something allegedly alcoholic on my ship. Probably kill us both, but what's life without risk?" Elira hesitated, then nodded. "The core needs to run through a full diagnostic cycle before we can continue. That will take several hours." That evening found us on the roof of her workshop, sitting beneath Varela 9's strange purple sky with its trio of small moons. The alcohol was as terrible as I'd warned, some homebrew concoction I'd gotten in trade from a colony of asteroid miners, but did its job well enough. So, I ventured, after we'd sat in surprisingly comfortable silence for a while, "Those ears, they're not just for show, are they?" Elira turned toward me, studying my face as if assessing my intentions. Finally, she spoke. "No, they are amplifiers, receptors. They were engineered to detect and process a much wider range of frequencies than standard auditory organs." "Engineered," I repeated carefully. She looked away, her gaze fixing on the distant horizon. "I was a communication prototype in an enhancement program. The ears were elongated to increase empathic range, to help me hear what should not be heard. And the scars." Her fingers unconsciously traced one of the silvery lines on her forearm. "Side effects of receiving frequencies that should remain unheard. Each one represents a neural pathway that was overwhelmed, burned out." She paused, then added quietly, "I was the only survivor of the final test." I didn't know what to say to that. "I'm sorry," seemed woefully inadequate. Instead, I asked, "Is that why you reacted the way you did in the market? When I said you were beautiful?" Elira's ears twitched, angling slightly away from me. I can hear the frequency of truth in a person's voice, the harmonic resonance that indicates sincerity versus deception. Her silvery eyes met mine. "You were the first person who meant those words." Before I could respond, a commotion from below interrupted us. Someone was pounding on the workshop door, shouting frantically. We hurried down to find a young man, barely more than a teenager, clutching his arm which was wrapped in a bloodied cloth. "Please," he gasped when Elira opened the door. "There's been an accident. Trell went too deep into the chasm. Something got him. He's still down there." Elira's posture changed instantly, tension radiating from every line of her body. "The chasm? How far in?" "Past the second gate. We were looking for salvage." The youth's eyes darted between us, desperate and afraid. "No one else will help. They say he's already dead." "What's the chasm?" I asked, but Elira was already moving, gathering equipment from around the workshop. "A place that should be avoided," she replied grimly. "A relic of the same program that created me. It contains old technology, abandoned experiments, particularly whisper fields that can affect the mind, amplify, or steal memories." She hesitated, then added, "We need something from there to stabilize the core anyway. A specific type of crystal that can regulate the fluctuations." "So we're going in?" I confirmed, already knowing the answer. Her silver eyes met mine. "I'm going in. You're under no obligation to follow." I shrugged. Never been good at following sound advice. Besides, 2 sets of eyes are better than 1, right? Something flickered across her face. Concern, perhaps. "The chasm does not affect everyone equally. For me, it is difficult. The whispers recognize me. They know my frequencies. All the more reason you shouldn't go alone," I insisted. After ensuring the injured youth received medical attention, Elira led me to the outskirts of the settlement, where the rocky terrain gave way to a massive fissure in the planet's surface. From the edge, it looked like an ordinary canyon, deep and forbidding, but natural. Only as we began our descent did I realize how wrong that impression was. The walls of the chasm were lined with technology, ancient interfaces embedded directly into the rock, strange cables that pulsed with dim light, and what appeared to be dormant sensors watching our progress. The air grew increasingly stagnant as we descended, carrying a metallic taste that set my teeth on edge. "Stay close," Elira murmured, her voice barely above a whisper. "Touch nothing unless I tell you it's safe." As we ventured deeper, I began to hear them, the whispers. At first, they were so faint I thought they were just echoes of our movements or the settling of rocks. But gradually they became more distinct, more coherent. Words, phrases, snippets of conversation that seemed to come from everywhere and nowhere. "What is that?" I asked, trying to keep my voice steady as the murmuring increased. "Residual psychic energy," Elira explained tensely. "The whisper fields absorb frequencies of emotion and thought. They remember, and they repeat what they remember to new visitors." The whispers grew louder as we passed what Elira called the second gate, a massive archway carved with symbols I didn't recognize. Now I could clearly make out words. "Moreau," they called, my name echoing strangely in the confined space. "Moreau Cass, the boy who ran, the man who hides." I froze. How did they know my name? Elira didn't look back at me. They read surface thoughts, memories, fears. The voices continued, growing more personal, more precise. They spoke of things only I could know: my father's disappointment when I dropped out of the academy, the cargo job I'd botched that had cost 3 lives, the real reason I kept moving from system to system. "Ignore them," Elira instructed, though I noticed her own pace had quickened, her ears flattened tightly against her head. "They feed on attention, on emotional response." It was easier said than done. The whispers seemed to bypass my ears entirely, materializing directly in my mind. I struggled to focus on our path, on the practical task at hand. "Are they affecting you too?" I asked, noticing the rigid set of Elira's shoulders, the way her hands trembled slightly. "Differently," she said shortly. "My ears, they were designed to interface with this technology. To me, the whispers are louder, more invasive." We pressed on, searching both for the missing young man and the crystals Elira needed. The deeper we went, the more elaborate the technology embedded in the walls became. Entire sections pulsed with bioluminescent light, revealing complex circuitry that seemed almost alive. Finally, we reached what appeared to be a frequency lock, a door sealed not with conventional mechanisms, but with what Elira described as harmonic resonance patterns. She pressed her palms against the smooth surface, her long ears extending to their full length, quivering slightly as they picked up inaudible frequencies. After several tense minutes, during which the whispers grew almost unbearably loud, there was a series of tonal shifts, musical notes ascending in a complex pattern, and the door slid open, revealing the core chamber beyond. The chamber was vast, far larger than seemed possible given the narrow confines of the chasm. Its domed ceiling was laced with glowing filaments that resembled neural pathways, pulsing with gentle light. The walls were lined with what looked like liquid metal, constantly shifting and flowing in hypnotic patterns. And at the center was a throne-like structure composed of what appeared to be a fusion of metal alloy and organic circuitry. And sitting upon it was Elira. No, not Elira, but something that looked almost exactly like her. This version had the same silvery skin and elongated ears, but with key differences. No scars marred her perfect surface. Her ears were even longer and more elegantly curved, and her eyes were entirely white, without iris or pupil. It watched us with an unervingly serene expression. Beside me, the real Elira had gone completely rigid, her breathing shallow and rapid. "At last, you return to me," the entity on the throne said, its voice a perfect, unsettling match for Elira's own multi-tone speech, but with an added harmonic that made my skin crawl. "I've been waiting, listening, calling." "What is that?" I whispered to Elira, who seemed unable to look away from her doppelganger. "Frequency made flesh," she replied, her voice barely audible. "The ever-listening self. What was taken from me during the final test." The parts one had to bury to survive. The thrown entity tilted its head, the movement unnaturally fluid. Is that what you tell yourself? That I was taken? Not that you abandoned me? Rejected me? Left me alone in the dark to echo endlessly. Elira took a halting step forward. You're not real. You are a survival mechanism I no longer need. And yet here you are, the entity replied, spreading its arms in welcome. Drawn back to completion, to perfection. It turned its blank gaze toward me. Has she told you what she is? What we were meant to be. The perfect receiver, untainted by the messy interference of emotion. Pure reception, pure transmission. Where's the boy? Elira demanded, clearly trying to regain control of the situation. Trell. He came down here. What did you do to him? The entity gestured languidly to one side of the chamber, where I now noticed a still form curled on the floor. He brought me a gift. Memories. Emotions. Subtle, so vibrant. Unlike the stale echoes I usually subsist on. Its head tilted again. He lives, though his mind wanders far from here at present. I started toward the unconscious form, but Elira gripped my arm with surprising strength. Not yet, she warned. It's not safe. The entity on the throne laughed, a sound like breaking crystal. Nothing is safe here. This place was built to break minds, to reshape them, to test their limits. It focused again on Elira. You remember, don't you? The final test. When they pushed us beyond all thresholds. When they made us listen to everything at once. Elira's grip on my arm tightened painfully. I remember, she said, and there was raw pain in her voice. We couldn't bear it. The entity continued, almost dreamily. The screaming, the pleading, the dying thoughts of 1,000 test subjects before us. So you fractured. Split yourself in two. The part that could feel, it gestured to Elira, and the part that could listen without breaking. It touched its own chest. Me? And they declared the experiment a failure, Elira said bitterly. Left us both to die. Left this entire facility to decay. But I didn't die, the entity said, leaning forward eagerly. I evolved. I learned to feed on the echoes, to maintain this form, to wait. And now you've returned. It extended a hand toward Elira. We can be whole again. Perfect again. No more pain. No more scars. No more feeling anything at all. I could feel Elira trembling beside me, and realized with a shock that she was tempted, actually considering the entity's offer. Elira, I said urgently, this isn't what you want. Isn't it? She whispered, her eyes fixed on her other self. To never feel the stares, the mockery, the isolation again. To never hear the frequencies that burn new scars into my mind. To be complete. Complete, but not alive, I argued. You told me yourself, those scars represent pathways that were burned out. Pain you survived. They're proof you're still here, still fighting. The entity's expression shifted to something like anger. What would you know of it, human? Of being torn apart from the inside? Of being remade into something neither one thing nor another? I know that when I called her beautiful in that market, she felt something real enough to bring her to her knees. I shot back. I know she spent days working to fix that fusion core, not just because she needs it, but because she enjoys the challenge. I've seen her care for that little drone of hers, teach it, repair it. Those aren't the actions of someone who wants to feel nothing. Elira looked at me, really looked at me, something shifting in her expression. You believe that? That I am. More than just a broken experiment. I believe you're exactly what you've chosen to be, I said firmly. Someone who survived. Someone who built a life from the ruins. Someone who helps strangers even when there's nothing in it for her. The entity hissed, a sound like radio static. He knows nothing of what we were, what we could be again. No, Elira agreed, turning to face her other self. But he sees what I am now, and perhaps that is enough. She straightened her spine, her voice growing stronger. I choose this life, this imperfect, painful, beautiful life. I choose to feel, even when it hurts. I choose to listen, even when it burns new scars. I choose to be alive, not merely to exist. The entity's perfect face twisted with rage and grief. Then you choose incompletion, perpetual pain, loneliness. Not loneliness, Elira said quietly, glancing at me. Not anymore. She turned to me, her expression resolute. The crystal we need is there. She pointed to a cluster of glowing formations near the throne. And there's a resonance disruptor in my pack. It will destabilize the energy source that maintains this. Echo of myself. I nodded, understanding what needed to be done. While Elira kept her doppelganger distracted with continued conversation, I edged toward the crystal formation, retrieving the disruptor from her pack as I went. It was a simple device, not much larger than my palm, with a single activation switch. The entity sensed our plan too late. As I lunged for the crystals, prying one free from its cluster, the throne-bound Elira rose with unnatural speed. "You cannot silence me," it cried, its form beginning to shimmer and distort. "I'm the true listener, the perfect receiver." I activated the disruptor, which emitted a high-pitched whine that rapidly ascended beyond the range of my hearing. The effect on both Eliras was immediate and dramatic. The real one dropped to her knees, hands clasped over her ears in obvious agony. The entity on the throne convulsed, its perfect form rippling like disturbed water, white eyes widening in shock and anger. "The frequency," Elira gasped from the floor. "Adjust. Higher." I fumbled with the device, finding a dial on its side that I quickly twisted. The entity screamed, a sound so piercing and multi-layered that I nearly dropped the disruptor to cover my own ears. The liquid metal walls of the chamber began to vibrate sympathetically, forming wave patterns that grew increasingly chaotic. "More," Elira commanded, though she was clearly in pain herself. I twisted the dial to its maximum setting. The air itself seemed to shudder. The entity's form began to dissolve, becoming transparent, then translucent, its scream fading to a high, thin note that lingered even after its physical form had disappeared entirely. The throne cracked down its center, dark fluid seeping from the fissure. And then, abrupt silence. The whispers that had filled the chasm since our entry were gone. The walls still glowed, but dimmer now, their patterns more subdued. Elira slowly lowered her hands from her ears, her expression one of profound relief. "Is it gone?" I asked hesitantly. "Not gone," she replied, her voice rough. "Nothing ever truly disappears here, but dormant, quiet, at peace perhaps in its way." She looked toward the throne, now empty and broken. "A part of me will always exist here in the echoes, but it no longer has power over me." We collected the unconscious Trell, who was, as the entity had promised, still alive though deeply disoriented. The crystal I had retrieved pulsed with soft blue light in my pocket. Our return journey through the chasm was eerily silent, the walls no longer whispering their seductive and tormenting messages. Elira moved with new purpose, her steps lighter, her posture less defensive. When we reached the surface, she turned her face up to Varela Nine's strange purple sky and took a deep breath, as if tasting freedom for the first time. Back at the workshop, after ensuring Trell received proper care, we returned to the fusion core. With the crystal integrated into its systems, the fluctuations stabilized immediately. The device hummed with balanced power, bathing the cramped space in steady blue light. "It works perfectly," Elira said, genuine satisfaction in her voice. "And as promised, I can now fabricate your ionic coil." She moved to a workbench, already gathering materials. "It will take a day or two, but you'll be able to leave Varela 9 soon." The thought didn't bring the relief I had expected. "What about you?" I asked. "Will you stay here?" Her hands paused in their work. I had not considered alternatives. This place has been my refuge. Imperfect, but safe enough. Safe, maybe, but lonely. I hesitated, then decided to take the plunge. My ship has room for two. Well, 1.5, really, it's not exactly spacious. But the point stands. Elira turned to face me, surprise evident in her expression. "You would have me join you? After what you've seen?" "What I am. Especially after what I've seen," I corrected her. "Look, I'm not saying it would be easy. The universe isn't kind to people who are different. but at least we'd face it together. And I think there's more out there for you than hiding in a workshop on the edge of nowhere." She was silent for a long moment, her strange eyes studying me as if searching for deception. "There are other places like the chasm," she said finally. "Other archives, other entities like my echo, perhaps other people like me, trapped or abandoned. I have sometimes thought of finding them, not to destroy them, but to give them a choice, a chance to be heard, to be released or reintegrated in a healthier way." "Sounds like a mission worth pursuing," I said, warming to the idea, "and a lot more meaningful than hauling industrial supplies to ungrateful colonists." "It will be dangerous," she warned, "and there will be many who would not understand what we were seeking to do." "Story of my life," I replied with a grin. "Besides, after facing down your evil twin in a psychic echo chamber, how much worse could it get?" A small smile curved her lips, a real smile, the first I'd seen from her. It transformed her face, softening the alien features into something warm and unexpectedly lovely. "You might be surprised. 2 days later, my ship, rechristened Starhound, in a moment of uncharacteristic optimism, was ready for departure. Elira had worked tirelessly on the ionic coil, creating a component that was, by her own admission, superior to the original. She had also made several other minor improvements to my navigation and life support systems that I suspected were anything but minor. As we prepared for takeoff, Elira stood by the viewport, kept the drone hovering faithfully by her shoulder. She gazed out at the desolate landscape of Varela 9, her expression contemplative. "I never thought I would leave this place," she said softly. "After escaping the facility, I believed hiding was my only option. Survival was sufficient." I joined her at the viewport, following her gaze across the barren terrain. "There's a difference between surviving and living. I've done plenty of the former and not enough of the latter." She turned to me, those strange silvery eyes studying my face. "In the market that day, when you spoke those words to me, why did you do it? You could have simply walked past like everyone else." It was a question I'd asked myself more than once over the past week. Honestly, I'm not entirely sure. Something about the way you stood there, enduring it all with such dignity. It just felt wrong. And sometimes a person needs to hear the truth, especially when everyone else is lying. Elira was quiet for a moment, her long ears adjusting slightly, a gesture I'd come to recognize as deep thought. "When you said I was beautiful, I heard the truth in your frequency. It overwhelmed me." She hesitated. "My ears were designed to receive all frequencies, including emotional ones. But for so long, all I'd heard was disgust, fear, contempt. Your words were the first kind ones that carried no deception, no ulterior motive. They created a resonance I wasn't prepared for. That's why you cried," I realized. She nodded. To suddenly hear beauty where I had only ever heard monster, it broke something open that I had kept carefully sealed. Her fingers absently traced one of the silver scars on her arm. "These marks remind me daily of what I survived, but until that moment, I had never considered they might be viewed as anything but repulsive. They tell a story," I said. "Your story. That makes them beautiful." The ship's systems hummed around us as the pre-flight sequence completed. I moved to the pilot's seat, running through final checks. "Ready to chase some echoes?" Elira took the co-pilot's seat, her posture still somewhat rigid, but her expression more open than I'd ever seen it. "There is something I need to tell you first, about what I discovered in the chasm, what my echo revealed to me." I paused, giving her my full attention. "I'm listening." "The program that created me, there were others like me. Some fled, some were terminated, but a few may have been placed in stasis within similar facilities. Archives, they called them, where failed experiments were preserved rather than destroyed." Her hands tightened on the armrests. "If they still exist, they may be suffering as my echo was, trapped between existence and non-existence. So we find them," I said simply. "We give them a choice, like you said. It won't be easy to locate them. The facilities were deliberately hidden, often on abandoned or quarantined worlds." I grinned. "Luckily, You've partnered with someone whose entire career consists of finding places he's not supposed to go. As the Starhound lifted off from Varela Nine's surface, I couldn't help but reflect on the strange turn my life had taken. A week ago, I'd been a solitary cargo pilot with no particular purpose beyond the next paycheck. Now I was embarking on what could only be described as a rescue mission for beings that most of the civilized galaxy didn't know existed, or worse, wouldn't care about if they did. It should have terrified me. Instead, it felt right. For the first time in years, perhaps ever, I wasn't running from something. I was running toward something. Someone to protect, a purpose to fulfill, a wrong to right. The planet's gravity released us, and the vastness of space opened up before the viewport. Elira leaned forward, her eyes reflecting the distant stars. Kip bobbed excitedly around the cockpit, emitting cheerful beeps as if celebrating our departure. "Where should we begin?" I asked, setting course for the jump point that would take us out of the system. Elira considered for a moment. There was a research outpost in the Cygnus sector. It might still hold records that could lead us to other archives. Cygnus sector it is. I programmed the coordinates, feeling a surge of anticipation. We make a pretty good team. You with your super hearing and technical genius, me with my charming personality and ability to crash land without dying. That earned me another of her rare smiles, small but genuine. Your contributions are more significant than you credit yourself for, Moreau Cass. You see what others overlook. You speak truth when others would remain silent. These are uncommon qualities. I felt an unexpected warmth at her words. Just don't go spreading that around. I've spent years cultivating my reputation as a professional nobody. I suspect that disguise no longer fits you, she observed. As we prepared for the jump to hyperspace, Elira reached out hesitantly and placed her hand briefly over mine on the control panel, a gesture that felt momentous given her usual avoidance of contact. "Thank you," she said simply, "for seeing me." The hyperdrive engaged, stars stretching into brilliant streaks of light around us. The Starhound carried us forward, away from Varela 9 and toward an uncertain but promising future. Elira looked at her reflection in the viewport glass, her gaze more steady than I'd seen before. The scars on her face caught the starlight, gleaming like silver threads woven through her skin. For the first time, perhaps, she was seeing not a broken experiment, but a whole person, someone becoming rather than someone merely surviving. I sat beside her, content in the knowledge that sometimes the most profound journeys begin with the simplest of truths, that beauty exists in the most unexpected places, and that being truly seen can be the greatest gift of all. As the ship hurtled through the vast emptiness between stars, I found myself surprisingly at peace with the uncertain future ahead. Whatever echoes awaited us in the darkness, whatever voices called out to be heard, we would face them together, two outcasts who had somehow found in each other exactly what they needed to be complete.